before we get going, I just wanted to give you a brief kind of intro to the Santa Lucia Conservancy, if you're joining us for the first time. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit land trust incorporated in 1995 to protect and steward in perpetuity the unique natural, cultural, and aesthetic values of the Santa Lucia Preserve, and serve as a model of ecological sustainable development to communities outside of the preserve. So our organization manages 18,000 acres of land within the 20,000 acres of the Santa Lucia property to protect and enhance the extraordinary ecological resources that we have. In addition, we work with a variety of environmental partners like Fish and Wildlife to conduct and promote land management and ecological research to increase our understanding of the local natural resources and the interactions that human communities have with those natural environments. So today, our talk is going to be roughly 40 minutes, with 20 minutes at the end to ask questions. If you have any questions throughout the talk, please put them in the chat. Suzanne is going to help me monitor that, and we'll field all those questions at the end of the talk. And like I said, we are recording this talk, so you will have access to this after the fact. Do we have Zach with us too, Jason?
No.
Okay, just you today?
Zach's handling the cat, so.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so we have Jason Lombardi here with us today. Jason is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's large carnivore research coordinator for the whole state. So he's going to be chatting with us today about his research on mountain lions throughout the state and how that applies to us here in the Santa Lucia Mountains in Central California. All right, Jason, I'm going to hand it off to you. Do you have a presentation that you want to? Okay.
Yeah.
I will make you a co-host, and you should be able to do that. You want to try and share your screen?
Yeah. We're gonna hop up here. Okay. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Dr. Jason. I'm already on the as Emma said, on this statewide large Carnivore Research Coordinator, and I'm the lead mountain lion scientist for the state of California. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about mountain lions, our mountain lion conservation program, statewide research efforts, as well as some low notes on human wildlife conflict. And so when we talk about mountain lions itself, that they're known by over 40 different names across the country. Here in California, most commonly as mountain lions, but they're also known as pumas, and that's the most widely used name throughout the rest of their range. In Florida, they're known as panthers, and throughout much of the western West, they're also known as cougars. And so for the cat itself, as you see here, that's your typical mountain lion. They're about 2 to 2.5 feet tall, about 8 feet long or so, with the tail making up about half that animal's length. In California here, the males average around 120 to 130 pounds, but they could get up to 170. And females are usually 75 to around 85 pounds, but some females do get up above 100 pounds. And again, for the color, so the adults is what you typically see here. They're a tawny brown with a light underside, and then the cubs will be will have spots on them. So typically here in throughout the world itself, as I mentioned, they have this very wide range that goes from the Yukon all the way down to Chile, and in North America, they do have some isolated populations in the Great Plains as well as in Florida, and that's indicative of the fact that their historical range actually went all the way to the eastern seaboard, and over the past 100 to 200 years or so, they've lost a lot of their range itself. In California here with this map here, that's from a study done in 2020, and this is typically where the probability of use for mountain lions are, and usually that is going to be in forested areas, in more mountainous habitat, especially where there's high populations of deer and elk, and rugged areas also. So for the conservation program itself, it was established in 2015, and the program coordinates statewide mountain lion research efforts and population monitoring to inform habitat conservation and protection efforts. And we will work with multiple external state, federal, academic, and non-governmental partners. And the objectives here is looking at habitat suitability, demographics, gene flow, connectivity, relationships with other taxa, and human lion interactions. And so when we talk about mountain lions in the state of California, it's good to talk about the history of mountain lions. So from around 1907 to 1963, there was a bounty system for mountain lions, and we think about over 12,000 mountain lions were killed. From 1963 to 1969, they were a non-protected animal itself, in which those animals were able to be hunted. From 1969 to 1972, they were a game mammal with a regulated hunting season. Now, following the 1971 hunting season, then Governor Reagan issued a hunting moratorium on mountain lions, and that lasted through 1986. So officially, mountain lions have not been allowed to be hunted in California since 1972. Following 1986, due to building political pressure, mountain lions were again listed as a game mammal, but due to a court decision lawsuit, they were not allowed to be hunted. And that takes us up to around 1990, in which there was a public referendum at the time, and it was voted on by all of the constituents in the state to make lions a specially protected species itself, which they're not allowed to be hunted. They're only allowed to be taken for potential public safety or for a conflict. And that's the way they've been. And they're the only species in the state that has that specially protected distinction itself. Conservation program was established in 2015. And in 2020 was when the Center of Biological Diversity and others petitioned to list mountain lions on the Central Coast and Southern California. So when we talk about mountain lions in the Central Coast and out here closer to the Bay Area, we have to look at the extent of human modified habitat. So the San Lucia Conservancy area is right over here. As we can tell, there's over the last 10 to 15 years, obviously the extent of human modification in these areas has increased. And so when we saw the map earlier with all the potential mountain lion habitat, and then we look at right now, what does that look like when you overlay the human dominated areas plus all the highways? What we do end up happening is you have defined subpopulations of mountain lions based on their genetics, and the area by the San Lucia Conservancy is on that central coast area, and it's at the northern fringe of it, and that area is genetically distinct between like this Santa Cruz like population, well, largely because of highways, not because there's not enough habitat. There is habitat for the cats. They're just restricted because of the habitat itself. And the Interstate 5, as you can tell, also restricts those populations. And then as you get down to Southern California, you have more restricted movement that just led to distinct populations in Southern California itself. And so because of that, and what I want to pull here, and this is from a published paper here, this is the expected heterozygosity of the genes. And basically, when you start looking at the Central Coast and you look at the internal relatedness of the population, that is an indication of how what's the relatedness among the cats. It's just at the time this was published, it was right around 20%, which is when you look at two other areas of the state, it's a lot lower. And so when we talk about genetics itself, we're interested in indicating gene flow and thus connectivity, and that's an issue across California. And we regularly try to monitor mountain lion populations across the state itself. The aim to have is multiple lines of inquiry for a single monitoring effort, have adaptive management or conservation, and that way we can use the data itself to inform potential policy. And basically having additional lines of inquiry, survival, or how they respond to prey or livestock wrapped up into that. When we look at habitat or space use, as I mentioned this map earlier, habitat use is scale dependent. And so we in California can roughly say we have more mountain lion habitat than any other state, but does that equate to good connectivity? So yes, as I said earlier, there is a lot of habitat, but this habitat is restricted due to all the highways. And so when we look at that, we have to factor in, based on these areas, is it the age of the animal? Is it in the time of a year or so of when these animals will use these areas? And then we look at the deer and other prey species itself, does it affect where mountain lions will occur in time and space? And so for the mountain lion statewide efforts that we are starting here over the next few years or so, we have four main tenets of that. And that's looking at mountain lion ecology in the context of transportation corridors, critical habitat linkages, and human fragmentation. We're looking at human mountain lion and really livestock interactions to be able to mitigate future conflict. We're looking at mountain lion interactions with co-occurring carnivores and ungulates and other taxa like bears and deer. And we're also, again, looking at the genetics themselves to be able to best manage these populations into the future. And so as I mentioned all this. And so here within the region itself, we are working with a lot of collaborators within the region itself, including the Land Trust, Cruz, UC Davis, Caltrans, Wildlife Conservation Network, Wildlands, I work the Elkhorns, so Reserve, as well as the U.S. Forest Service. And so basically, and this is from the talk earlier, but basically when we have monitoring methods themselves for whether that be at the Elkhorn Slough Reserve on more on the San Luis Conservancy lands, we typically will be setting cages for the mountain lions itself, and that allows us to safely and humanely capture the animals and collar them and collective idle information. And typically, once we capture those animals, and then we will place a GPS collar on those animals, and those collars will then talk to a satellite, and that data is sent to a satellite operator, and then sent back to the computer itself, so then we can be able to see where that cat is around the landscape itself. It's usually delayed by a few hours, but we can have a better idea of where the animal is occurring. When we talk about conflict itself, now this is a big topic across the state itself, especially in some areas, because as you move away from, say, these people might own goats, they might own llamas, sheep, and so over time the depredations have increased, but as I mentioned earlier, the mountain lion population in 1960s and 70s was fairly a lot lower than it was today. So over time, we would expect those to increase. But really, what we see is that sheep and goats are the most common itself, and usually are males. But the highest incident rate for mountain lion conflict is not here on the Central Coast. It's actually in the Western Sierra foothills, just to the east of Sacramento. And so when we talk about mountain lion policy in the Fish and Game Code, currently Fish and Game Code RD 801.5 mandates the use of non-lethal measures for mountain lions. So basically what that means is if there is a mountain lion in a conflict situation, especially here on the Central Coast, we're going to take measures to non-lethally haze that animal that has not been deemed as an imminent threat to public health and safety. So whether that is using air horns, or using hounds, or doing something to scare the animal away to try to change its behavior so it doesn't associate the conflicts thing around human habituation as something that they want to continue. Obviously, Fish and Game Code 4802, which concerns the take of lions itself. So, and that means is that, and then when we talk about that, is that only the law enforcement for the state can designate an animal as being an imminent threat to like public safety. And so usually is that if there is a mountain lion does take your livestock, that has to be submitted to the state within must be submitted to the state, and then we have to respond within 48 hours. And so what usually happens is, so here on the Central Coast, if there is a conflict and we come out, we'll issue you a non-lethal hazing permit, and those permits shall expire for 10 days. And that permit is specific to your property itself, which means that if you have the permit and your neighbor also has an issue with a mountain lion, they cannot use the permit. Each person will have their own. And so, and then if the lion was to come back to your property itself, you can get another non-lethal permit. And to on. But what we're also doing in certain parts of the state, part of that non-lethal hazing process is we are going ahead and capturing and collaring those cats to try to better understand how they are interacting with humans, the zones also. And so when we think about this mountain lion in a conflict heading. So if it happens, you will contact the department itself and you will submit a wildlife incident report. And again, as I said, we have about 48 hours to respond to that, to one, determine the cause of death or the livestock, to confirm the species. We will suggest preventative measures, as well as recommending mitigation and deterrence. And Zach Mills, the unit biologist for Monterey County, has said that the majority of the calls he gets, while a lot of them are thought to be mountain lions, they end up being feral dogs. But mountain lions do attack livestock from time to time, but it's not as wide spread as people think. So again, if you were to go online here and submit through the wildlife incident reporting system, this is what that page looks like. And so when we talk about how do you deter a mountain lion in an area and how you prevent it from coming back to your house, some people will put up a fence or a secure enclosure itself so that lion cannot get inside any area where you're keeping your animals overnight. You could simply play a radio overnight outside. Mountain lions are scared of like people, and so they try to avoid us at all cost. You can put out motion activated lights and flattery, or even using livestock guardian dogs. And so when we think about reducing attractants in a shared effort, and this is for if you own livestock itself, or if you don't have livestock and you just have like pets outside, you want to limit for ranging animals. You want to keep your cats and inside, and that's mainly because your cats can pass on diseases to mountain lions. So if the cat is sick for any reason itself, the mountain lion can get something. And then the same thing, the mountain lions can pass things on to the cats. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The same thing with dogs, canine temper can be like passed on to cats. Basically, if you do own livestock or goats and those animals die, is to appropriately discard those carcasses, and again to appropriately secure those enclosures for domestic animals overnight. And so this is kind of what we're talking about here. So as you can tell, a fence like this, you might think it's good and it's not going to, it's going to keep a mountain lion out. But as you can tell here on the bottom here, that mountain lion's easily hopping over that fence. So what we usually recommend is not just having a fence here, but have something where this top one goes back and you can actually run like a hot wire on top of this, or you can make this be flexible so the cat, if it was to try to jump and hold on to it, it would not be able to hold its weight. And then we think about enclosures for goats or chickens or so forth. Like this is kind of what we're talking about, where these things are enclosed at night and can be locked itself. When you think about these are nice, but a mountain lion can go into here because there's nothing blocking it. They can hop over this fence. And while this is nice here and this works, actually up here is completely open, and that could allow an animal to get inside. And so with that, my contact info is right there. And if you ever have any questions, you can feel free to call or email me. And Zach Mills' information is below. The one thing I do want to mention is that when it comes to the Santa Lucia Conservancy itself, and we think about what type of research we're interested in for the Conservancy and the areas in and around Monterey County there on the coast there. So due to we are really interested in connectivity. So the interactions with highway on all the highways going into Monterey and then to the south, and to see how mountain lions are navigating those landscapes, and that could better inform our abilities to mitigate highway outline interactions. We're also primarily interested in how these mountain lions are navigating urban environments. There's been a lot of work in urban mountain lion studies done around San Francisco and then down in LA, but not so much in other areas of California. So having a better understanding of how these cats are using these environments as we move across the state itself. And then again, to do the proximity of the mountain lions in the Santa Lucia range itself, which does extend down to the Carmel Valley, trying to better understand potential interactions of mountain lions and individuals that may or may not own livestock. So with that, I thank everyone for the opportunity, and I'll be happy to answer any questions here.
Great, thank you so much, Jason. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties on my own computer. So as it pertains to questions, we have a question coming from Cecile. How many mountain lions are in Monterey County? Which is a great question.
Yeah, so currently we don't have a up-to-date official population estimate for the state of California. We are working on one. It's still being, and those estimates are still being finalized. We hope to be able to submit that analysis and that paper for scientific publication by the summer. And as soon as that gets published, we'll be able to officially come out with those estimates. But as of right now, those things are still in progress. But I will say, due to the extent of the habitat itself, mountain lions are likely using every inch of habitat that is available to them.
Yeah, definitely. She also said, especially in Carmel Valley, which Carmel Valley has a lot of mountain lions cruising around. She says there's been a lot of sightings along the Carmel River near Quail Lodge, which is near the entry to one of the points in the preserve. Yeah, there's definitely a lot out here. Hopefully we'll have better estimates after this research is done. We have a question from Maureen. How best to inform you of sightings?
So we understand that like people are seeing cats. I think since the Santa Lucia Mountains and the range itself is an area of interest, obviously, for our capture efforts. So what you can do is you can some, at those, over email, to my self or Zach Mills, and we'll be able to take that into account. If you know of any instances of outlines being seen or attacking livestock, obviously you can enter that into the wildlife incident reporting system, and that will come to Zach, and Zach will be able to report that back to us. And one thing I do know is that through the advent of social media itself, and applications like Nextdoor, there is a flurry of mountain lions sightings across California itself, and probably more than we can probably keep track of. But that said, we do appreciate the outrages. So
Yeah, great, thank you. I know that at least for sightings of mountain lions in the area where we are in the preserve, Zach is very responsive to responding to people's reports. And I know that Palo Corona definitely has had some activity recently, as well as us in the Santa Lucia Preserve. We have a question from Paul. What percentage of cats' diet is deer versus pig versus turkey?
So across California itself, from what preliminary research and other research across the range itself has shown is that mountain lions primarily do feed on deer, and that makes up the bulk of their diet. Now, that said, mountain lions will kill pigs, and coyotes and raccoons and elk also. As for turkeys, I'm sure mountain lions, if they have the ability to, they probably would take one. But again, for a cat of this size, you also have to consider that it's going to try to get its best it's optimal bang for the bucks, so to speak. And so a pig, for example, mountain lion is not necessarily going to take a huge boar, but for smaller pigs, it's definitely on the table.
Great, thank you. Mike has a question. What is the time frame from when an animal is caught in the cage to when it is released?
Yeah. So and this is so how I roughly explain how the cage trapping goes. So typically, if they were to come out to the sound, they would say it can see the lands, or even if someone in the area has property that they'll are willing to have us capture a cat on. Well, what we'll do is we'll place a bait out there on the landscape, and then we'll place a cellular camera there to see if the mountain lion will come in and cache it. If the mountain lion does, go ahead and cache and feed on that deer. Then we'll come back the following day and place a trap. And so when we place the trap itself, we'll place the trap right around sunset, and then we'll back out of the area. We will have a trap transmitter on the trap itself that will send a email and text notification when that trap has been sprung. We also have a cellular camera that will send us a text message when there's a cat at the trap or inside the trap, so that way we can respond immediately to that cat, and usually we'll be like parked not that far away, and we will monitor that trap site overnight, and to make sure that we can respond immediately for whenever that happens, whether that's at 6 o'clock in the evening, 10 o'clock in the evening, or 2 o'clock in the morning. So and that's roughly when that happens. Once we do I'll wake up the cat, and the cat is dated. As soon as the animal wakes up from the anesthetic and can attain a sternal stance and can walk off in its own hour, then the animal is released itself like that. The whole procedure takes about from the time that the animal is caught to the time it's able to fully recover, can take up to 2 to 8 hours.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Hold on a second. Zach, I was just here.
Hey, everybody.
Morning.
Sorry I'm late. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Zach Mills, so I'm the Unit Wildlife Biologist for Monterey and San Benito counties. I've been working with Emma from the Santa Lucia Conservancy quite a bit as we kind of create this idea and on some other projects. So I'm here and in the room now for the past 3 minutes. So if anybody has any questions for me or wants to reach out to me, please feel free, and I'll have Jay let me know where and if I need to jump in at any point in time.
Great, thank you for joining, Zach. We have another question from Roger. Will mountain lions attack a barking dog?
Usually mountain lions will like the dogs themselves can be a deterrence for lions, and they'll usually try to stay away itself. However, that said, mountain lions are if they are feeling like bold, they may attack dogs. So but I think it comes down to the size of the animal. Usually a livestock guardian dog is going to be on the much larger side, and well over 100 pounds. So those animals are going to be able to scare off the cat itself, or more like smaller dogs. That's a difference.
Great. Jameson asked, what would you estimate the average home range of a breeding female in more remote areas of the state, like the Santa Lucia Preserve, to be?
So
We'll get that answer.
Yeah. So I want to look at our records and make sure I can cite to answer here. And the reason is because it really depends on the area that cat's living in, and obviously the amount of roads and highways that are in the area. As we look to areas more like Southern California itself, and some of those areas, those mountain lion home ranges are a lot more constricted. And even though there can be somewhat remote areas of Southern California itself, those mountain lion home ranges can be kind of constrained in size, or it kind of will force those cats to try to go above and beyond. And so for here on this Central Coast itself, especially in the northern half of this Central Coast, they might be restricted a lot smaller as you get closer to Monterey. But then as you go further south on the Central Coast, they could naturally expand.
Great. yeah, hopefully this project that these guys are working on will give some more insight into those home ranges moving forward. We have another question. Can you restate the collaring idea? Is there a plan to collar and track the animals just so we have an idea of where they are? My default setting is they're awesome and we want to protect them.
Yeah, so the way approach this as this being a year effort. So typically we collar outlines from the fall over the springtime with opportunistic captures potentially over the summer, as long as it's not too hot outside. And so that's going to be opportune. And basically, and even in the times that we are catching cats, it's going to be opportunistic, like based on our availability. And that's mainly because we are catching cats in other areas of the state itself. And so when we do this on a more localized level itself. So when we are catching cats, we will be purposely placing a bait at a specific site in hopes of trying to get that cat to that specific site or to get a cat at that site. And so it's going to be a lot more targeted compared to maybe other animals where you're placing out a ton of the traps at the max to catch a mountain lion, where we would place 1 to 2 at that localized site. If it's like a family group with females, then we will try to capture the entire family group itself, but that also increases the amount of traps that we use. But those are all placed at that more localized site. So
Great. Are there any wildlife highway passages slated for Central California, like the Annenberg Crossing in SoCal?
Yeah. So currently, right now, the Highway 101 is a major area of interest for this state for mountain lions, principally because, as I showed on that map earlier, that is a area between the Santa Cruz population and the Central Coast population. And so that's a area of that a potential wildlife crossing would go into the future itself. But also, as we try to collar more cats in these areas, there might be other highways that do come up and saying, okay, well, this is a barrier to mountain lions. So a lot of this work here is not only to help advise and aid other areas of or to advise areas of the state where there is a known need for a crossing, but also identify other areas.
Great. Diane asks, are preserve residents' wildlife cameras useful for this research, specifically going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, if y'all are picking up outlines or regularly on your cameras and fail for afraid to send them to they Conservancy or Zach or myself will they would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to get emails with any information that you guys are collecting out there. Everything helps. Even from our
respond to that as well, Emma, if I can.
Yeah.
But locally, I'm based at the Monterey headquarters, and yeah, I would love to know, regardless, if you guys are detecting regular mountain lions. But if there are issues or conflicts, which I'm guessing you went through in the talk, I'll I'll be the quickest response, certainly. And I think Emma's got my contact information. So if there's ever an issue, if you went through the Conservancy and Emma could reach out to me, I'll be the quickest. Jay's up in Sacramento, so locally I'll be the quickest response.
Yeah, great. Can you give us a brief overview of the plan for the preserve, a time frame, number of traps, etc.?
As I just said in earlier responses. So as soon as we talk with the preserve itself and go through our logistical on Towers itself, I think if everything is a go, I would maybe like to see captures happening before the summer. Obviously, the department has cameras out on the preserve currently to monitor areas where we're getting mountain lions on camera, and it's those areas that are going to be us to be able to really identify specific targeted spots where we can catch cats. And then, as I said before, and then from there it's a lot more localized and targeted into where we're capturing animals.
Yeah, so we currently have 5 cameras out in selected locations that are being checked monthly on the preserve. We have had an animal actively walking along Robinson Canyon Trail. So there is the potential that with our logistics meeting coming up, that could be somewhere in the near future. I know we also have mountain lions on neighboring properties that have been seen recently too. So there are a lot of animals out there. It's just finding out where they're walking around. Zach, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I saw the question and yeah, absolutely. Was that so? Mike's question, a brief overview of the plan, was that all adequately answered? I'm sure Jay covered it, but I think the big thing for me is just understanding these things are somewhat dynamic and flexible, and a lot of times you'll find that me personally, I'll pivot plans accordingly. If it's a female, I think she has little ones, I might put some dummy traps out to try to get the little ones, out of the way so I can target the female. So the trap number, my time frame, sometimes the target animal informs me of what my time frame and my trap number is. So I don't always have an ideal. I have an ideal, but I don't always get the ideal. But usually, me personally, I like to always run double traps. Depends on the activity in an area. Like Jay said, if there's opportunity to catch a family group, we will target a family group. And I'm going to say a lot of things Jay said. He did sneak out, by the way. He's just checking in on some work I was just doing. So he's out of the room now, but mountain lions, they're a very broad ranging carnivore, from Canada clear down to the south of South America. And you have little pockets so I'm answering that question that Paul had down there. You have little pockets of evidence coming out about this, but there's a lot of landscapes in kind of few and far, I guess, in between their range where we don't have much. And because it is such a broad range, you have different human encroachment, different urbanization, different populations of carnivores. So one of Jay's top priority research agenda items or objectives in the state is to look at those community questions. So looking at the impacts of mountain lions on other species, predator-prey dynamics, carnivore dynamics, but it's really a community ecology perspective. But some of the most relevant research, Paul, to your question, is coming out of Yellowstone National Park, where they have a complete temperate guild of wolves, grizzly bears, black bears, and obviously mountain lions, and how mountain lions within that community partition the resources, whether it's time or whether it's space, prey, and I say partition in the sense that if a mountain lion likes to work 12 to 8, maybe a grizzly bear likes to work 8 to 12 to not overlap, right? They avoid each other. It's a strategy of avoidance. But anyways, in these balance systems, the short answer is yes, absolutely. We're finding all sorts of information around the world that large carnivores positively impact carnivore communities by contributing much more to like a system of checks and balances, right? By, you know, when you pull out those top players in the game, you'll see concepts like mesocarnivore release. So all of a sudden there's more raccoons that the wolves can predate, or because they don't follow the wolves' temporal partitioning strategies, species propagate. So it just kind of gets out of whack, right? So we just call it, as an ecology, we call it destabilization. So we find, to answer your question, that yes, mountain lions really contribute to stable systems. However, at this point in time, there's not much that looks at that community-based ecological research in the state of California, which is one of our agenda items.
Great, thank you, Zach. I do want to emphasize for those residents tuning into this talk, the trapping effort that would occur on the Santa Lucia Preserve would be on wildlands. We want to make sure that we're doing these efforts far away from people, far away from people's animals, just to ensure everybody's safety for both the mountain lions and the humans and pets. So all of our cameras right now are kind of focused on those areas that are a little bit further away from residences, so that we're minimizing that impact on all of you guys. Do we have any other questions? I think I've gone through everything that was in the chat.
Yeah, for me, you guys have any follow-up questions? Yeah, I apologize that I'm late to this. I've had a thing or two going on in the past hour, but I'm always happy to chat, and I'm at the Conservancy regularly, and I'm always happy to meet folks and talk through what I'm working on, even at the Monterey level, not necessarily just at the Conservancy, but I'm always happy to get into a conversation. So please feel free to reach out.
Great. We have one more question. How long would this GPS radio collar work? So on the animal, how long is that going to last?
I'm going to my answer is going to be clear as mud for that because the GPS collar it lasts based on a couple things. So each collar comes with a guaranteed amount of fixes that it's going to hit. So for example, I like 8,000 fixed collars, which means you're going to record 8,000 GPS locations. Now, if we only record one location per day, we're going to get 8,000 days, but no way is the battery on that collar going to last that long. So the battery would die that fuels that before you run out of fixes. So we generally try to maximize it, right? With these particular animals, it's I think Jay wants 2-hour fixes, but mind you, a collar doesn't just record GPS location. It also has a triaxial accelerometer in it, which records how an animal does this or goes like this, and we can look at behaviors like eating, for example. So if you crank that accelerometer up to look at every single second, the collar is going to last a week. So we try to balance it amongst all those things. Generally, we look at about 18 months to 2 years that we're getting out of a collar. In males, well, and also females, sometimes we put a little cotton insert in the collar. It's like a drop-off insert, and the goal being that will rot away over time, and that collar will fall off. And those cotton inserts have been calibrated to have a certain drop-off date, an approximate drop-off date. There's also mechanical drop-offs where we've got a device on them that we can press a button and detonate the collar and it will drop off. So long story short, about 2 years is what we go for. That's a dynamic. Yeah, there's some flex to that statement. Depends on the species, depends on the battery, depends on the GPS, depends on a lot of things.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to take 2 more questions. One being from Diane. Zach, can you talk about what you've been working on today? And then we'll have one more question after that.
Did Jay say what I've been working on since he was here?
Not in detail. He just said you were busy with an animal.
Yeah, I've been working on a mountain lion. actually, most of my day today has been with a mountain lion that's not from this area. It was from Hollister. That was a conflict animal, kind of just in someone's yard, and gave me a long night and has given me a long day as well. So yeah.
This team has been very busy and I greatly appreciate them being here today. Barry, I'm not seeing your question right now. If you want to unmute and ask that directly to Zach, you're more than welcome to.
That's a great question, Maureen. Oh yeah, that's a great question, Barry.
Oh, thank you so much.
You want to read it out loud? Are you concerned, or is it a risk that placing radio collars on the lions could be tracked by illegal hunters? That's so. My background is primarily in Africa. I studied large carnivores in Africa for all my graduate research, and that actually happened in Africa at one point in time. Not on my project, but on another project where people were tracking species and then were able to illegally hunt them. And I don't know where that leak happened. Certainly is a concern. However, after that episode in Africa, collar companies really tightened up their security on this data, right? So, I mean, really the only way you could get it is to, you can't tap into the collar, and they've got pretty encrypted data at this point in time. I would have access to the data. Jay has obviously access to the data, and there's probably half a dozen people in the department that have access to the data, but they're on also department devices, which also have some security features as well. So very unlikely. Did happen at one point in time in Africa. So that's a great question, but that was really the impetus for beefing up security on collar data. How's it going? Good.
All right, guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Zach and Jason. I know you have had a very busy day, so I appreciate you taking the time to be with us. I want to be respectful of your time. So we are going to wrap up this call. Feel free to send me any other additional questions that come up. I can definitely ask Zach and Jason moving forward and answer any of your questions. I thank you so much for being here tonight and taking the time to join us.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in as executive director. I just want to say thank you to both of you for your partnership in this exciting project. You know, a big part of our mission is conserving biodiversity on the preserve and in the northern Santa Lucias. And so we really are excited to be working with you on this project to help fill in some data gaps on this genetically distinct population of mountain lions in the state, in an area where we really don't have that much information, and hopefully this can lead to more projects going forward. So thank you guys, and thank you everybody for tuning in both on and off the preserve. We appreciate it.
Yeah, also, and thank you guys very much. You guys have been a joy to work with. So I look forward to chatting with everybody.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you guys.
Have a great night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.